Good day, geographers, and welcome to our next topic in our series of geography lessons. I'm your host, Donovan Rattray. Today, we'll be looking at human trafficking. Well, human trafficking is a crime involving the exploitation of someone for the purpose of compelled labor or commercial sex act through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. Note, it is a crime. Now, human trafficking actually has various elements to it. It's not just one wholesale activity. No, it's actually a process, believe it or not. It is a process, and that is why it is so successfully pulled off in so many countries across the world. Let me just make something clear, geographers. Human trafficking is not just taking place in North America or other countries across the world. It's actually happening everywhere across the world, even in the Caribbean, even, yes, even in Jamaica. It actually happens. And sometimes you see it playing out in front of you, but you do not realize that it's actually human trafficking taking place. Good. So, there are actually three main elements to this thing called human trafficking. They are, first of all, the movement. A lot of movement happens here. Now, in the movement, or otherwise known as the act, you tend to have what is called recruitment. Now, recruitment is the method by which the persons who are to be trafficked are actually acquired or actually gained. All right. So the human traffickers actually use various ways to get these people who are to be trafficked. All right. And also, once they have been recruited, they are then transported to wherever they have to be given over or handed over. And this is what we call the transfer. So someone else is going to collect the person who has been recruited after being transported to them. This is what we call the transfer. It's like they're handing over the trafficked individual to the person right now. That person who has taken control of the person who has been trafficked eventually lock them away from the police or anybody who can actually spoil their operation. This is what we call harboring. So they can lock them away in some dungeon or in a room or some area, but they are locked away. They are actually hidden from anyone who can actually spoil their trafficking operation. And this is what we call the harboring process. Now, the next element that is involved in human trafficking is the control. Yes, once the persons or the means, it's called the control or the means. Now, once the person has been acquired by the traffickers, right, and are harbored, in order for them to cooperate or to get in line or to get jiggy with it, or in other words, then to get with the program to do what they ought to be doing, they have to have some form of control over them. Now, control can come in various methods. They can actually threaten them like bodily harm or even threaten to harm their families. They can use various forms of force, so they can beat them or bully them, something that will actually force them to just work with it, right? They'll use some form of trickery or coercion, and they'll also use abduction, which is a form of control. Fraud is another form of method used. Now, fraud is basically using various ways to tell lies or um, some other false way to actually manipulate the person that has been trafficked. So it's basically lying to the person used in a very clever way. all right, to keep them in line. Deception is another thing too. So they can also deceive them to making them believe what they want to believe in order to have full control. So they might tell the person, hey, we love you, we take good care of you, and this is the reason why we're doing all of this for you. That is what we call deception. They know that you're very poor and they know that you're desperate to have a better life for yourself, right? So they will abuse their power that they have over you or take advantage of your vulnerability. That is another means of keeping control over you. And they may also be paid benefits. So you have benefits being paid to the persons who are keeping the persons who are being trafficked, and therefore they are able to keep these persons under control. Finally, there is the purpose. What do we need these individuals for? Well, there are various purposes for which they traffic people. Exploitation. They want to exploit or take advantage of the person. They want to force them to work. They are using slavery. They may even, yes, remove their bodily organs. Yes, that is one of the other reasons why people are being abducted and trafficked.
Over 20.9 million men, women, and children are victims of human trafficking. But do you know what human trafficking actually is? In a small sleepy town, people are dreaming. But not everyone's dreams will come true. Human traffickers prey on people's dreams and lure them away for their own benefit. How do they do this? Human trafficking doesn't happen all of a sudden. It's a process. First, traffickers act. This includes recruiting victims, transporting them to the place where they'll be exploited, hiding them from authorities, and receiving victims from other traffickers. So why don't the victims run away or say no? Because traffickers use different means. This includes threatening or forcing victims to do what they want, abducting or deceiving the victims, and abusing power. Sometimes traffickers promise small payments or benefits to get the victim to cooperate. And why are the traffickers doing this? The purpose of trafficking is exploitation. Traffickers take advantage of victims for their own profit or benefit. This is human trafficking. This man's neighbor tells him that he has a great job for him on a very safe construction site and that he'll be paid a lot of money. With more money, he can make his dreams come true. He agrees to take the job. A few days later, the neighbor's friend picks him up and they drive to the construction site. It's a very long way from his home. This man is put to work immediately without any training or protective equipment, without enough to eat or drink, and with very few breaks. After many months, he's only been paid a fraction of what he was promised. He knows he's been tricked, but he doesn't have enough money to get home. This man is a victim of human trafficking. He was recruited by his neighbor and tricked into thinking he was going to work at a safe construction site for fair pay. Instead, he was forced to work long hours in unsafe conditions for almost no money, while others benefited from his exploitation. One day, while looking for jobs online, this woman comes across an opportunity to work in a restaurant in a big city. Her application is successful, and her new employer arranges for her travel there. She is met at the airport and driven to a part of the city that looks nothing like she expected. The car pulls up to a building. The door is shut and locked behind her. She is made to perform sex acts against her will. She is trapped. This woman is a victim of human trafficking. She was transported by a trafficker from the airport to the location of the job. When she arrived at the location and realized it was not the restaurant job she was expecting, the traffickers used force to keep her there. She was then exploited for forced sex work. This 14-year-old boy on school break is approached on the street by a woman who looks trustworthy. She tells him that she needs workers at her factory, and she promises him lots of money. He brings her to meet his parents. They are so happy for him. He'll now be able to save money for school. The woman drives him to the next town. They pull up to an old building. There is someone waiting for him. As he is led inside, the nice lady drives off. The factory isn't anything like she described. There are lots of people working, including many children. He works all day, and after just a few hours of sleep, he starts again. He is sad. This isn't what he expected. He misses his family. After weeks, he still hasn't received any salary or been allowed to contact them. He is trapped. This boy is a victim of human trafficking. He was tricked by the woman who recruited him on the street. He was then received by a trafficker when he arrived at the factory and exploited by being forced to sew clothing. For anyone under the age of 18, only the act and purpose matter for it to legally be a case of human trafficking. Understanding that human trafficking doesn't happen all at once, but instead is a process of act, means, and purpose, helps us better identify victims and trafficking trends. People everywhere are dreaming and looking for opportunities to make those dreams come true.
Oh, wow, everyone. I'm sure that snippet that you just watched a while ago basically help you to fully understand what is human trafficking and how people can easily be deceived into being trafficked. You see, it is not just a crime, it is actually a system, and it does involve some of the most creative, influential, as well as most brilliant set of people involved in it. So it's not no set of idiots involved in this thing. It is very systematic, and it is a process. Some of the times they have been scouting their victims for quite a long time, studying them so that they know how to approach them, right? And how to manipulate them in the process. So that is what human trafficking is. It's very systematic, and it does not involve individuals who are numbskulls. They are very brilliant, bright, smart people. So you have to keep that in mind. So much so that even the sweetest looking lady can easily deceive you into being trafficked, or even the nicest looking, most handsome guy can easily deceive you into being trafficked. Whenever they come to you with something that is too good to be true, walk away. Or better yet, run away screaming. That is a red flag right there. Alright? So you have to be very careful and do not trust anyone. And let me just give you this one word of advice. When you are going home in the evenings or going anywhere, it is best to walk with someone else or walk in a group, because it is when you are alone and most vulnerable, they will actually abduct you. So be careful. Let us move on. Now, there are basically different types of human trafficking. One, sexual exploitation, and you saw that played out in the snippet a while ago. Two, forced labor. Yes, you see that with the little boy and the man as well. Three, domestic servitude. They'll force you to work as a domestic helper or a house helper in people's homes, and that is where a lot of abuses and manipulation does take place with the trafficked or the trafficking victim. And then there is organ harvesting. Yes, not all people who have been tricked into human trafficking are used for sexual exploitation, forced labor, or even slavery or domestic servitude. No, quite a number of them are actually victims that are used to have their organs removed from their body. Some of them are kept alive, but for the most part, depending on what organs they want, and yeah, not a lot of them are dead. So those are the different types of human trafficking. Oh yes, let us not forget child trafficking. That's another type of human trafficking also.
The Ivory Coast, an extremely poor region of West Africa, exports hundreds of thousands of tons of cocoa annually. In fact, nearly half of all the world's cocoa. People in this region, in desperate hopes of work, are told that there's opportunity for work if they are willing to travel. Crowds of men, women, and young children leave their villages and even leave their countries in pursuit of this work. But every year, thousands encounter a world of captive slavery. Traffickers sell these people to farmers for as little as just $20. They are now the farmers' property and are forced into cocoa plantations and used for hard labor. Once in this dark system of slavery, it is nearly impossible for them to escape. They experience horrible work conditions and are locked away in tiny huts after a hard day's work every evening, given just small tin cans to use as toilets. To counter disobedience, they are beaten relentlessly by their masters every morning and evening until they are left nearly unconscious. They are then forced to work and watched extremely closely. This is done until they are deemed to have accepted their fate as slaves. They are told that if they ever attempt to escape, they will be killed, and it is this instilled fear that keeps them obedient to their masters. As stated, nearly half of the world's cocoa comes from the Ivory Coast. Of the cocoa that comes from the Ivory Coast, it is estimated that up to 90% of plantations use some form of slavery. This is a shocking statistic, as it means that at least 2/5 of the world's cocoa is tainted by slavery. With falling prices of cocoa, more and more farmers are buying and using slaves. Companies like Hershey, Mars, Kraft, and Nestle have all been directly linked to slavery. In 2001, media sources revealed that Nestle had been using farms on the Ivory Coast in which 600,000 children had been kept in slave-like conditions. Shockingly though, Nestle kept on using these same farms right up until 2012, when a second major report revealed just what was going on. While the company has pledged to change their ways, it is unapparent if anything has truly been changed. In 2016, the Fair Labor Association reported that 70% of Nestle's farms were not trained on the fact that slavery was even illegal. They also reported that, quote, there is no process in place to monitor, report, and remediate cases of forced labor at the farms, end quote. Even in 2016, evidence of child labor in dangerous conditions getting paid little to nothing remains.
The stars and dark the moon, hush the night and the morning moon.
Now, geographers, there are actually several ways by which the human traffickers use to obtain their victims or to traffic their victims. Yeah, man, they are very clever. And as I said to you, They know who they want and they know how to approach them. And there are various methods by which they use to lure in their victims. The first one is seduction and romance. And this is one that your young ladies have to be very careful of, because guess what? You have very handsome, attractive looking young men walk up to you and tell you sweet nothings and gain your trust as well as your love. And they use this to manipulate the girls into being sex traffickers. Yes, they do. And not all of them get them for sex trafficking. Some of them use it to lure them into doing other types of forced labor or even organ transplant. So be very careful. They use the seduction and romance ploy or technique in order to deceive the victims. All right. They also use false advertisements, and this is where they place advertisements in the Gleaner, or should I say in the newspaper, or on the websites, or wherever, all right, in order to attract their prey. So they may advertise jobs or educational opportunities, basically anything they can use to attract the victims, because usually these advertisements look legit, and you know, because they're in the newspaper or they're on some legitimate website and thing, but they are effective and it happens all the time. So once again, be careful. They will come to you about lies about education and travel opportunities, just like what the little sweet lady did to the little boy in the little snippet that you watched earlier. Yeah, man, they will advertise travel opportunities to go and travel and work opportunities. So you have to be very careful before you actually sign up for any of these agencies. Make sure that they're recognized by the Ministry of Labor. If they're not recognized by the Ministry of Labor, do not, and I repeat, do not pursue these individuals, because most of the times the red flags that they put up is simply this: it is too good to be true. So they might talk about them are going to take care of your travel expenses and all other document expenses for you, and you don't have to pay them for it. All right, things like that drop a red flag. It is too good to be true. So once you see anything or hear of anything like that being promised to you, don't do it. But to be on the safe side though, check with the Ministry of Labor, because all of these so-called job travel and work agencies, they are programs. They have to actually pass through the Ministry of Labor. So check with the Ministry of Labor about them, about that company. If they don't recognize that company as being reputable, or they have never heard about them at all, do not pursue this venture. All right, please. They will also abduct you. They don't just abduct you like that. Most of the time they will watch you, they study you, they know your travel patterns, they know who you walk with, when you walk with that person, what time you leave school or what time you leave home, wherever, and the route you take. So sometimes they will actually study you for a period of time just to make sure, and then when the time is right, they will drive up to you and abduct you. So it is safe that whenever you are leaving school or going to school or leaving home or going anywhere, especially for the young ladies, please walk with other persons, travel with somebody else, or walk in a group. They will think twice about abducting you if they see you in the company of other people. All right, and please avoid traveling on lonely roads. And if you're going to travel on lonely roads, please walk with someone. All right, and try your best not to be walking on the road at nights. All right, any opportunity they seek to abduct you, they will take it, and it doesn't matter exactly where. Even in the middle of a town, they will do that. But please make sure you are walking in the company of somebody else, because once again, when you walk in the company of other people, right, they will think twice about abducting you and don't even carry it out. All right, so they prefer when you are alone. That's why. So you have to be sure you cover your grounds. Be vigilant when you are traveling. Sail by family, of course. In certain countries, especially like in Thailand, for example, and it happens here in Jamaica and the Caribbean too, family members will actually sell their own flesh and blood into, yes, human trafficking. They will sell them to become prostitutes, or to be in labor, forced labor, or even to be in some sex exploitation, sexual exploitation. Yes, families do that. Parents actually sell their children, their daughters, into being sex slaves. Why? Because the money that they earned from their prostitution or their labor, it goes right back to the parents. And a lot of these parents, especially the fathers, they don't even bother work because the money are coming in, and are coming enough and regular, so they don't have to work. So they actually sell their children into these in the hands of these traffickers, who will pay handsomely for them, because they might make back 10 times more anyway from the labor of these children. And finally, recruitment through former slaves. So sometimes former sex workers or people who have been trafficked are also used in the game to attract other victims, because they have been through it, they know the ropes, so they will also be used like a bait to get them into it as well. All right, so that happens very often.
The first stage is the luring stage, and that's when like the trafficker is getting to know you. Like he's collecting information about you, like finding out what you want out of life and things like that. He took care of everything for me, whether it was my phone bill and things that I needed at the time. Like I didn't have to worry about eating or anything like that. Like just meeting most of my needs that I had at the time, I guess. And I didn't want to lose that. He basically said, you know what, like that life we talked about, like I'm trying to pursue those things now. Like I want to have a house, I want to move away, you know, buy the cars and all that stuff. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to Toronto, and if you're not coming with me, I'm just going to take another girl. The second stage is the grooming stage, or the honeymoon stage, and that's where like he's treating you like a princess and he's being so sweet to you, and you know, it's kind of like a movie where you're thinking, how did I deserve this guy? Like what did I do? How did I get so lucky, type of thing. After that, it was the whole pampering thing. Like we went to the hair salon. I got my hair done. Like I got a weave in, this like long flowy weave. You know, went and got my nails and my toes done, because you have to like be in tip-top shape, obviously. We went to like the stripper store to buy like bikinis and this and that. Went to the shoe store, got like these big platform heels. I guess he was kind of giving me a pep talk on the way, like just telling me, oh, you have nothing to worry about. Like, I'll protect you. My uncle's going to be there. His girlfriend's going to be there. But also in that time, he was being very, very sweet to me. You know, we were like in the car, like kissing and stuff. And his uncle was like, oh, look at you little lovebirds back there. And in my mind, I was just trying to keep myself calm. Like, I was trying to talk to him so that I wouldn't think about what I was going to do. And then the third stage is the coercion and manipulation stage. And that's when they completely switch, like when they go from being so sweet to going to, you know, calling you out of your name and just completely disrespecting you, stretching your sexual boundaries. A specific moment that happened is we were arguing one time and he's just there cursing me out. Like, he literally cursed me out probably for like 15 minutes and I'm just sitting there like taking it. I'm like, yeah, but we broke up, so why are you mad? And I just kept asking why he's mad. He's like, so this is what you do? This is what you do? And I'm like, you literally have no reason to be mad. Why'd you break up with me? And he's like, you know, every time we break up, we end up getting back together. So why did you think this time was any different? And I'm like, because you told me, like, this time I'm completely done with you. So yeah, he just kept calling me out of my name. He's like, oh, since you want to be a freak, like, be a freak for me and my friend. And I'm like, okay, whatever. So I grabbed my bag and I'm going to leave. Like, I stopped, I didn't go out the door, and I'm like, am I really prepared not to be with this guy? I'm like, I should just do it, because then that will prove that I didn't really cheat on him. And once I get on to the last stage, which is the full-on exploitation stage, because once I like took my first customer, I wasn't thinking about it like, oh, like I just exchanged sex for money. It was more so thinking like, oh, this isn't that big of a deal. Like, I could have made so much money if I would have been charging from the first time I had sex. Also in the exploitation stage, that's when you're like fully isolated, and at that point, like, you have no sense of self-value. And that's what it was. He just broke me down to my lowest level, like to the ultimate lowest level, to the point where I felt like I couldn't survive without him, and I was so dependent on him. And basically he exploited that. When we would argue, he would say things like, oh, no one's ever gonna love you how I love you, or those people don't care about you. He put that wedge in between me and my friends. There's other friendships that he kind of manipulated to cause an argument between us, to the point where I was like, oh, I'm not talking to that girl anymore. If he doesn't kill me, like, maybe I'll encounter like a trick, and the trick will be violent or something. So I guess a little bit of it was fear, and I guess the other part of that was just like being fed up at the end. I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. So at that point I started arguing with him, and I'm like, how come you get to hold all the money? And I guess just challenging him. And then he eventually, I was lucky enough, like eventually he just let me go. He was like, you know what, like, I'm not doing this with you anymore. All we do is fight. You're not making me any money, so I'm just gonna send you back home to Nova Scotia. And when he did send me home, like, I was completely like suicidal. Like, I didn't know what to do with myself. I'm like, I would rather be dead than deal with this. Honestly, like, I didn't trust myself to be by myself. Because of the lady that I was staying with, like, I had access to like different types of prescription pills and stuff, and like all I could think of was like, how many pills do I need to take to kind of overdose? Like, I don't want to live this life. This is not what I thought would happen. Like, I thought me and him were going to be together for life. I don't have any regrets, like, in terms of the situation, you know, like, I got to know myself a lot more, but I can't get back that time. Like, I don't get to be a teenager again.
What we saw was that traffickers were setting up employment agencies to target these girls with false promises of legitimate work.
They tell them that they have modeling jobs for them, they have dancing jobs for them, or they have jobs for them in hotels and restaurants as waitresses or maids. And these women want to believe this. They need to believe this because they're desperate.
Cu ambele s-au comportat foarte frumos. Pe urmă, el odată ne-a întrebat pe noi dacă nu vrem să plecăm la Moscova. Și noi l-am întrebat și să lucrăm acolo. El a zis că el lucrează, păzește un magazin, dar noi să lucrăm, îi trebuie să niște fete să lucrăm noi în magazin acolo. Da, ca vânzătoare și el. Dar nu-i trebuiau bani, atunci pe mine nu avea nici cine mă ajuta și îmi trebuia la examen. Și m-am gândit că poate și bine, dacă noi prindesem încredere între ăsta. Dar eu tot timpul, eu îl întrebasem chiar pe dânsul, eu zic, Vasi, tu n-ai de gând acolo să mă duci și să mă avinzi de el și cu tineri, cum Adică fetele astea lucrează acolo și n-aveau să-ți spui că ceva se întâmplă sau să ia-ți placă acolo să vezi. Adică din vorbele lui. Și eu chiar m-am gândit că așa, eu am vrut să-mi fac viața, poate și cu...
Everybody wants a better life for themselves, so they sell you a better life. Oftentimes they come pouring in, unaware of the hell that they're going to be entering. Other times, they'll just look at a young woman and say, we want her, we know she's not going to come, of her own free will, so they'll abduct her.
Да, я сначала согласилась, потом передумала. Узнала о том, что если я туда поеду, могу обратно не вернуться. Когда я им сказала, что я передумала, они сказали, что все хорошо, чтобы я не переживала. После того, как они сказали эти слова, меня закрыли в квартиру в течение 3 дней, пока не был день.
We could see that poverty had been an underlying factor driving girls into the sex industry. But what we didn't understand is how a parent could sell their own child into sex slavery. So we talked to Helen Sworn. She's been investigating and combating trafficking in Cambodia since 1999.
So we carried out a research, and many people said, the reason that those communities are selling their daughters is because they're the poorest. It's about poverty, it's about poverty. So we said, well, let's go in there and really see what's happening in those communities. But we saw in some of these communities, it wasn't actually the poorest families that were selling their daughters. It could be some of the families that wanted to sell them for more luxury items like mobile phones, televisions, that kind of thing.
But across the way, there's 6 men that sit there every day, smoke cigarettes, gamble, and drink beer all day long. From 10 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night, that's all they do. You say, well, how can they afford to do that? Because they all traffic their daughters. They'll sit there, they could work, but they don't work, and they traffic their daughters every single day.
You know what the reality is? The reality is about 80 to 90% of families are selling their daughters, not 40 to 50%. So we were seeing that what was emerging was a culture of complicity in selling, which was the most frightening phenomenon that we uncovered.
Now, the victims of human trafficking are usually men, women, and children who all have one thing in common. They are from the very poor or the very poorest set of people. All right? Not all of them though, but for the most part, most of the trafficking victims or the trafficked victims are from the poor class of people. And these are people who are poor and are desperate to make a life for themselves. Right? So basically they are more vulnerable and they are easy targets or easy prey for the human traffickers. But to be more politically correct, even though men, women, and children are victims, right? Most of the times, human traffickers target women and children because they are easier to abduct or easier to trick into being trafficked. Now, one of the things I want to also inject in this part too is that when it comes on to children, one of the reasons why they abduct or traffic children is because children are easily controlled. They're easier to abduct. They're easier to trick. All right? Doesn't take much. And a lot of these children, when they abduct them or traffic them, they abduct them for the gory or the very horrific reason for of organ harvesting. because young children have strong, fit organs that they would want, and these organs fetch a very high price.
Sometimes when persons hear trafficking, they think about sexual exploitation.
But it's much broader than that. It also involves persons being forced into labor, marriages, begging, and domestic servitude, among other acts. Human trafficking can affect anyone, regardless of gender or socioeconomic background. Any boy or girl, woman or man can be a victim of human trafficking. In Jamaica, the two common forms of trafficking are forced labor and sex trafficking, with children being the primary victims.
Our victim mainly, sadly so, has been mostly children, meaning persons under the age of 18 years old, has been our main victims of trafficking in persons in Jamaica, as well as most of our victims are local persons, and perhaps a little over 60% are locals, and the rest is international or non-national victims.
The Jamaica Constabulary Force, JCF, says it has taken note of a worrying trend where a family member, parent or guardian is the trafficker or the one who sells a child to a third-party trafficker. The crime, known as familial trafficking, involves primarily maternal figures, and based on evidence, most local cases of this type of human trafficking involve sexual exploitation.
Last year, there were 8 victims identified within Jamaica. And worthy of note is that these 8 victims were all children. This is a troubling trend. Since the start of 2021, we have identified 5 victims, all children, all girls. This is a troubling trend. Another trend that we are seeing, it's developing, is that women who are supposed to be the parents of or the guardians of these children are the ones who are seemingly seeking to exploit them.
Detective Inspector Gordon says a mother was arrested and charged last year for exploitation of her daughter. Another mother was arrested and charged in June 2021 for a similar offense, with other investigations currently underway against parents or guardians of children who have told the authorities that they were exploited. The Ministry of National Security, through the National Task Force Against Trafficking in Persons, has been raising awareness of these activities as part of efforts to curtail human trafficking in the country and sensitize the public about what the crime looks like.
The nature of human trafficking is that it continues to evolve, and it is not something that is easily, the concept of it is not easily grasped. But the basic knowledge of human trafficking, persons tend to believe that certain activities are acceptable, and because of this, they do not report. Persons tend to believe that human trafficking must involve transportation.
A critical aspect of the NATFATIP's mandate is the reintegration of victims into society. The support is a priority based on the psychological impact of the ordeal on victims.
After you've come out of a life of trafficking in persons, you are devastated, you are traumatized, and you will need the assistance of persons as well as your family members and government and other stakeholders to assist you in getting back to a normal life.
Systems in place to offer assistance include a government-operated shelter for victims of trafficking, a reintegration program, assistance with educational expenses and job opportunities, as well as training and other extracurricular skills. There is also assistance with immigration documents such as passport and other forms of ID if the victim is a non-national. This is in addition to psychosocial counseling by the Victim Services Division of the Ministry of Justice and the Child Protection and Family Services Agency.
this is long-term counseling. So it's not just counseling for a short term, because some victims, they suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and a whole host of other medical conditions. So we offer those services to help them to cope within society. And most importantly, depending on the circumstances that would have led them into a life of trafficking, we want to ensure that we prevent them from getting back into those circumstances.
All right, so we know that human trafficking is a serious crime that is not just local, but it's global. All right, and we all can play our role in actually trying to reduce human trafficking, whether home or overseas. So what can we do in order to reduce or to even eradicate this crime of human trafficking? Well, first of all, we can always report human trafficking activities to the law enforcement authorities. In other words, then, if you see suspected human trafficking activities taking place within your community or elsewhere, you can inform the police about it. Right. So a lot of the times these are playing out. One of the things that we see that is also a part of human trafficking is where you see children out on the streets selling different types of items. Now that is what you call child labor, and child labor is a form of human trafficking. And very often, a lot of the children, they don't go to school because they have to go out on the road and hustle. Or sometimes even they do go to school, they go out after school, especially if it's a shift school, and go and hustle. All right. So this is what we call child labor, and child labor is a form of human trafficking because these children were actually put out there against their will, for the most part, to sell whatever items they're selling in order to find their next day's lunch money. All right. And because of this too, certain days the child don't go to school because they have to go out and work the money, not only to benefit themselves, but to benefit the family. And they're put out there by the parents or whosoever is in charge of them to do so. So when you see these suspected human trafficking activities taking place within your community, inform the police. Learn the indicators or the signs of human trafficking, and we have done that through this lesson. Volunteer and support any trafficking efforts or anti-trafficking efforts that are being pushed by other organizations or individuals. Now, because we have an awareness of human trafficking, it is important to use various means to raise awareness about human trafficking. All right, so host an awareness raising event. For example, you can do it via your social media, or you can do it in person. But once you can get a campaign going against human trafficking within your community, it can actually garner a lot of tractions. In other words, get a lot of supporters behind your movement, and therefore eventually help in the efforts to reduce or to get rid of human trafficking. Always encourage your local schools to include the human trafficking topic in their curricula, and it is. So that is the reason why you're learning it in class at this moment. All right. Also, use your social media platform to raise an awareness of human trafficking, and we just said that a while ago in terms of hosting an awareness raising event. And you can do that through your social media platforms, whether it is Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, Snapchat, you name it, you can do it. Become a mentor to a young person or someone in need. Yes. Also, learn the tactics employed by human traffickers, and you have learned that already, like for example, the seduction and romance, the family selling them, or using abductions and various other techniques that you have learned a while ago. Finally, boycott all products and companies that participates in human trafficking activities. So chocolate makers like Nestle, for example, and even other computer or software manufacturing companies, they are even clothing companies, they actually employ people, like child labor or other people who are trafficked. And it's important that if you avoid buying their products, you will actually send a strong message that you're not tolerating human trafficking. All right, so there you have it, geographers. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I hope you learned something new about human trafficking. Now, remember to click the subscribe button and the notification button as well, so that when new content is released on my channel, you'll be duly notified. Thank you very much for paying attention. Thank you very much for listening, and I do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have learned something new, and your eyes have been opened where human trafficking is concerned. So please enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, stay fit, and continue to love the subject of geography. Once again, I'm your host, Donovan Rattray. Take care, everyone.